got families that are musicians. A lot of musicians. Like, in fact, one of them did. And last night, I guess there might be other stations either one of them or the top 20.
Let's come and the land is dark.
So we got to practice. So we started.
I didn't hear you. I know it.
You there, Chris? Okay. Mic check. Can you hear us okay, Chris? Is that all right? All right. Ladies and can we turn the sound? I got to make a little announcement here, Chris, before we start. Ladies and gentlemen, how this event started was a guy named Johnny Robertson who opened this joint up, and he and a guy named across the street, Silky, were the two guys that kicked off Bill Street. And I was doing a show for him way out in Bardo. And Johnny, we were packing him in pretty good on Sunday night. It was an oldies show. And Johnny said, GK, I'm moving you to Bill Street. I said, oh, John, I don't want to go to Bill Street. So it's going to happen. And it did happen. And John Robertson, he passed away several years ago. One of the nicest, most involved guy. He was just a super guy. And he knew how to run a joint, a club. And so when he did the show, I was telling his wife, Sandy, raise your hand over there, baby. Sandy has picked up where John left off, and she runs 5 clubs. You believe that? Her and son, Kendall, and all the people around. And she donates everything from this event to charity. But what I want to say is a little thing about Johnny Robertson. We hadn't recognized him, Sandy, over the years. What is this, our 30th year? Is this,
wow.
What, 38? Okay, this is our 38th. The sign says that up there somewhere. But anyway, Johnny Robertson, I'll show you what kind of guy he was. We had a guy named Richard Davis, who was an original member of the Memphis Mafia. You remember Richard Davis, right? Richard Davis was Elvis's stand-in in most pictures, movies, and traveled with Elvis, took care of a lot of things for him. Well, Richard was with us, and Johnny and I are over there in the corner talking. I'm playing records, and Johnny gets a call from California, and he said, Richard, it's for you. And it was someone calling from Los Angeles who said, Richard, I hate to tell you the bad news, but your mother passed away today. And Richard said, well, I don't have any money, I don't have a car, I don't have to get back to LA for the funeral. Well, Johnny heard about it, and he stopped it. He said, Richard, don't worry about it. I'm going to buy you a round-trip plane ticket. We're going to take you to the airport, and we'll give you some spending money. Don't worry about it. We're going to take care of you. That's the type of guy Johnny Robertson was. And then he bought Richard a car. Richard's on the way to work one night on a Sunday night, and he's late. And me and Johnny and I sort of kidding him when we were getting on his back about it. He said, well, it broke down. The old car broke down. So Johnny Robertson said, Richard, go buy your car and I'll pay for it. And that's the type of guy Johnny Robertson was. And I just want you to know, this is just not another joint on Bill Street. This is the real deal right here. And but also, a lot of the Memphis Mafia passed away. And Dino, you may have to help me on this one. Some of the guys that passed away, we're trying to think of that a while ago, Bardo. Well, let me see. We'll thank them. Anyway, if we can't recall their names, we just wish them well in heaven, and I know they're watching and checking us out. And also, people want to know, how in the world did you get the name Elvis Mafia? They thought it was Memphis Mafia. Well, originally it was the Memphis Mafia. And the way it all happened was, I was out in Hollywood. Elvis was making a movie at Paramount Studios. And he comes out of his dressing room, and Dean Martin is standing there. And he said, well, here comes Elvis and the Tennessee Mafia. But we all had on black suits and white ties and all that jazz. So we all started laughing about it. Well, the media heard about it, and they changed it from Tennessee Mafia to Memphis Mafia. So, and of course, it belongs to Graceland now, and they gave us permission to use Elvis's Mafia tonight. That's how that all happened. And let me see. I'm looking here. Oh yeah. There's a lot. I'll kick off with a funny story about Elvis. Back in the day, Elvis would, around Christmas, he would give things out. And would you know that he gave me a brand new Cadillac Convertible that year? And so I couldn't believe it. So I was on the radio at that time, and I got the guy to work for me to work another hour. And he did that night. So when I got off, I went out to Graceland to thank Elvis. He said, GK, you've been with me a long time, since the 8th grade. It's the least I can do. And he made a beautiful speech to me. We were right over here at the Cadillac dealership. And he said, GK, what is fame and fortune if you can't share it with your friends? I thought that was a great line. I think that's in my book. Also, by the way, my book is now sold to 85,000. It's done pretty good about that, yeah. Thanks to a lot of you people, it's been the #1 book at Graceland for the past 2 years also. Don't tell Priscilla that, because she and I are very good friends. Don't get me wrong. Priscilla and I are really good friends, and she'll get a kick out of it anyway. But that's some of the things I wanted to pass along that we never get around to. And I got a great story, another one. Well, if we have a slack moment here tonight, well, a couple of stories, one more, and then I'll get that, we'll move on. But Dewey Phillips was the first disc jockey in the world to play an Elvis Presley record. And Elvis never forgot it. Elvis had a great memory of those who were nice to him when he was coming up and those who weren't nice to him. And he never forgot either one. And so, Dewey, I'm out at Graceland, and that day, Dewey Phillips had passed away, and his wife, Dot, we called her Dot Dorothy, she had 3 children, and she sent me a letter, and she said, GK, it's Christmas time, and I don't have any money for the kids. Would you please see if Elvis could help out? And I'll never forget, I walked in Graceland. We all came in the back door, by the way, right, Dino? Nobody came in the front door of Graceland except Elvis. So we're in the kitchen, right off the dining room area, and I walked in, and Elvis was sitting there with his daddy, Vernon, and I said, Elvis, I got a letter here from Dot Phillips, Dewey's wife. He said, let me see it. He read it, he thought about it for about 30 seconds, and he said, Daddy, send her $5,000 for Christmas. I mean, that's the type of guy Elvis was. He never forgot the people who helped him, and maybe later on if we have time, I'll also tell you a story that's not very good, but it's actually happened, about Elvis never forgot the people that were not friendly to him, and the people that kind of put him down and said he'd never make it. A lot of people told him he'd never make it. And I remember that one time when we were on a train going to Hollywood to make Jailhouse Rock, and we took a little break. And Elvis, just me and Elvis in the car compartment, the other guys were walking up and down the train because Elvis' mom didn't want him to fly. So we took trains, and I was rehearsing his script with him for Jailhouse Rock. And he said, GK, I said, yeah, Elvis. He said, I wonder what they think now. I said, what do you mean? Who? He said, the people said I wouldn't make it. I said, like you, Elvis. And he said, well, we got together, we didn't have any money, me, Scotty, and Bill. And we had one car, we drove all the way to New York City, we did the Arthur Godfrey Talent Scout show. And he said, I could see them when I was doing my little thing. They give you a number 21, you come out and do your thing. And Elvis said he looked around, and he could see out of the corner of his eye, they were kind of making fun of his sideburns and the way he was moving around. And so when his audition ended, he said, okay, what do I do, sir? He said, well, don't call us, check your mailbox every day, or check it every week if we want you to come back. And Elvis said he went to that damn mailbox every day for 2 weeks, and nothing was there. But he never forgot how Arthur Godfrey people turned him down. And a lot of other people, there was one more, a long story. I guess I'll tell it right now, just get it out of the way. I'm in Hollywood with Elvis and the guys, Dino. You know, the guys there went with about 4 or 5 of us. And we were staying at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, which is a very exclusive hotel in Beverly Hills. And Elvis was working, we were making the movie Jailhouse Rock. Well, he had to be on the movie set at 9 o'clock the next morning. The phone rings in the suite, just me and Elvis talking. He said, GK, get that phone and see who it is. I answered the phone, and he said, who is this? I said, George Klein. He said, this is Farron Young. I used to tour with Elvis in the early days, and I just like to say hello to him. I'm in town making one of those cowboy movies, you know, like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers type thing. And so I went to Elvis and I said, Elvis, it's Farron Young. He wants to come up for just a few minutes and say hello to you, because he said, you worked together with him in the early years. He said, yeah, Farron's a good guy. Tell him to come on up. So Farron Young came up, and he had a guy with him. The guy looked like a tackle for the New York Giants. Real big guy. What he was a bodyguard. And so we talked for a while. And then as we're leaving, Elvis tells Farron Young, he said, Farron, I got a 9 o'clock call in the morning. I got to be on that set. I can't mess up. Hate to cut it short here. So Farron Young said, that's okay, Elvis. Appreciate you coming up. Well, the guy that was with Farron Young turned to Elvis, and he said, Elvis, he said, this is my last tour with Farron Young. Would you see if Colonel Parker could find me some work somewhere? And Elvis said, yeah, if he didn't know your name, he'd call you Chief. He said, yeah, okay, Chief, I'll see what I can do. The door to the suite closes, and I was around Elvis from 1948 until he passed away, so, you know, I was around him. He started cussing up a blue moon. I'm not going to use the language he used, because he used some really rough words. That's so-and-so, that S-O-B, that M-F, that so-and-so. And I said, Elvis, what's wrong with you? He said, don't you know who that son of a bitch was? I said, no, Elvis. He said, that's a son of a bitch that kicked me off the Grand Ole Opry. He said, I'll never make it. I said, really, Elvis? Is that him? He said, yeah. He came in my dressing room and said, kid, I think you better stick to driving that truck in Memphis, because you ain't going to make it. Did he ever? The guy who said that, I don't know where he is now, but we all know Elvis went to the top. That's just how nice a guy he was. He wouldn't say it in front of the other Farron Young and me until the guy left the room. But he never forgot who was nice to him, and he never forgot the people who were not nice to him. But those who were not nice to him, he didn't make a big deal out of it. He didn't embarrass him, but he just, back in his mind, he just knew. We're having a party one night at Graceland. And we had some parties at Graceland, boy, did we ever. And a lot of girls, a lot of guys from the Memphis Mafia, Elvis Mafia group. And so Uncle Vester, he worked the night shift. That was Elvis's uncle. Uncle Travis worked the day shift, that's right. So Uncle Vester was on the gate. He calls up to the house. He said, GK, tell Elvis there's 2 guys down here who went to Humes High School with you. What if they can come out and party? I said, well, Uncle Vester, you know, I got it clear with Elvis. He said, okay. So I went and told Elvis, and Elvis said, come here, GK. I said, what? He said, I said, Elvis, we're going to be here for a long time. He said, yeah, I know. He said, but don't tell them guys, don't hurt their feelings. Just tell them we're going to cut the party short, and maybe some other time they can come up. I went back to old Vester, and Elvis pulled me across the way, and he said, GK, those were 2 of the tough guys at Humes High that gave me a real hard time, picked on me all the time. He said, I didn't try to cause a scene with them, but I never forgot they were mean to me when I was in high school. But he didn't cause a scene. They wouldn't do that, would he, Dino? Anyway, those are my stories. I got a ton of them in that book. Lady picked it up a while ago. She's from Idaho, Iowa. No, she was from overseas anywhere. Okay, if you got a question, the little lady in the chair, we all know her as Miss Marian Cox. Elvis's nurse late at night. And Mrs. Cox had a wonderful event the other night, and I came by, didn't I? I told you I'd be there. And I sat with Jim McCarty. Where's Jim? That's my photographer, my driver, and everything. And so we went, and the mayor came, said he may come tonight. Miss Cox made a lot of money for charity. Where does that go to the church, or where's it go, Miss Cox? Then the church can do what they want with the money?
The money goes to, a third of it goes to Elvis Presley Charity Foundation. A third of it goes to the Russell Home in Orlando, Florida, which is a home for atypical children. And a third of it goes to help the youth that cannot afford to go on mission trips. We pay their way.
Okay, now look, Mrs. Cox is years old. I'm not going to tell you how old she is.
I'm 90 and I'm darn proud of it.
She is a wonderful lady, and she was Elvis's nurse at Baptist Hospital. When Elvis was in the hospital, he would always request Miss Cox to be his nurse or attendant. Then when she would get off sometimes, he'd have one of the guys call her and say, Miss Cox, come on by, let's have coffee together and just talk. And she'd go back to Graceland and stay a couple hours with Elvis.
Oh no, I stayed for every night, all night.
All night long?
For 6 months. He wanted me to, I was supposed to go for 2.5 weeks. Dr. Nick said he needed a private nurse for 2.5 weeks, and Elvis said, I'm going to take Miss Cocke. And I said, honey, I can't go with you. I have a full-time job here at Baptist. And he said, well, you can come out there at night, can't you? And Dr. Nick said, Elvis, she runs this floor up here. That's okay. Can you come out here at night? Just for 2.5 weeks. And I said, well, let me ask my husband and my daughter. And so they agreed as long as it was for 2.5 weeks. So the next morning I went in the room, Dr. Nick was in there, and the first thing Elvis said when I walked in the door was, can you come to my house at night? And I said, yeah, for 2.5 weeks. And he said, bring your Social Security card. And I said, well, what do you want my Social Security card for? And he said, so you can be paid. I said, I'm not going to take your money. I don't want your money, but I'll come out and take care of you. And he said, why the hell won't you take my money? Everybody else will. And that 2.5 weeks, for 6 months straight, I was out there every night. And my mother got ill and I had to leave. But then when he needed me, I was always there for him over the 2.5-year period. Never took a salary from him. But I'm going to tell you something. The pleasure was all mine.
Miss Cox.
And ladies, I got to rub his back every single night.
Miss Cox, tell these young ladies in the audience how good looking he was in person.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. No picture you've ever seen, no movie you've ever seen has ever done him justice. He was absolutely the most beautiful man I have ever seen, and he was such a sweetheart. He never called me Marian, and I said, why don't you call me Marian? You call everybody else by their first name. And he said, my mama and daddy would whoop my ass if I called you by your first name, because he said, you're older than I am. I was older than he by about 9.5 years.
Marion Cox is her name. Wait, hold on, Jerry. Miss Cox, hold on. Miss Cox, she's got a ton of stories. She has a book called I Call It Babe. Is that right?
Yeah.
How can they get your book?
I beg your pardon?
How can they get your book?
I think somebody brought some here.
Okay.
But
Anybody bring Miss Cox's book? Oh, there it is, back in the back, yeah.
I want to tell you something about the book. When I wrote my memories down after Elvis died, my husband and I were on our way to church about 6 weeks after he died, and I said to Bob, it seems so strange not to be going to Graceland anymore. And he said, well, you know, before you get too old to remember, you should write down what you remember about him. So we stopped on the way home, got a notebook, and went home, and over a period of a few weeks, I filled it and had to go back and get another one. And I put it in my camphor chest at home. I had no intentions of ever publishing that book. It was for me. And so Vernon, you know, was so distraught about some of the books coming out about Elvis. And so I told him, he was in the hospital at the time, and I said, well, Vernon, you know, I wrote my memories down about Elvis, but not for publication. And he said, could I read them? And I said, yes. So I took them the next day, and he went home and took my 2 notebooks with him. It was all written in longhand, nothing typed. And so 2 days later, he called me, he had me paged at the hospital, and he said, would you come out and have coffee with me today? And I said, I will. So I called home and said I was going to be late. I went out to Graceland and had coffee with him, and we visited a bit. And he said, I want you to do something for me. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? I'll do anything for you I can. He said, I want you to publish this. And I said, Vernon, I can't do that. And he said, why not? And I said, I wrote this down for me, for my memories. And I said, first of all, I didn't take any money from Elvis while I was taking care of him, and I'm not going to make any money off of him now that he's gone. And he said, looked at me so funny, and he said, well, forget about the damn money. I want people to know the Elvis you knew. That's the only reason that book was ever printed, George.
There she is, in person, Miss Marian Cocke. Wonderful lady. Well, thank you, but we may come back to you. I don't know how long you're going to stay, Miss Cox.
I'm going to stay until the cows come home.
Okay.
I'm not going to miss this.
So she's got a story you got to hear. Now, Dino and Bardo, we've all heard the story. But those of you who haven't, it's a great story. But what happened in the hospital with Elvis and the guys and Miss Cox and the nurses and so forth and so on. And Jerry Schilling made a curt remark. And she'll tell you about that one. It's a cute remark. And she jumped all over Jerry Schilling.
Well, I want to tell that story later too, but I also have a story that I was telling Sandy Robertson the other night that she never knew about, and I've got to be able to speak about Johnny too. You know how much I love Johnny.
We all love Johnny Robertson, yeah. He's a real deal. Jerry Schilling, my man. Ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction, Jerry's an old friend of ours, and we got in touch with Jerry and said, Jerry, why don't you come out a Sunday night and be with us at Alfred's? And he said, okay. He's the guy that had these banners made, and he's the guy that made the VIP. There's a really nice VIPs, Jerry. They're really nice. And Jerry at one time managed Paul Revere and the Raiders. Remember Paul Revere and the Raiders and all those great songs, Kicks and all those songs? And Jerry was with Paul Revere for many, many years. And this little guy on his right, we'll get to him in just a moment. But Jerry managed, and that's Flash at the board of directors. And he's got a couple of Elvis stories for you. But Jerry has been with us all along. And Jerry, weren't you with us that day in Hollywood? We're just driving around. Remember that story? It's me and you and Elvis and Ann Margaret and Richard Davis. I don't know if you remember that or not. And Elvis was going to buy this house up in Beverly Hills. And remember that story?
I remember it well, George.
Why don't you tell me? Ladies and gentlemen, Jerry Williams.
Perfect. Sandy, thank you for making this so nice all these years. This is my first year to do this, and I hope it gives you a little bit of a new slant to this thing, because I've never told any of these stories, and I've refused this for 38 years.
Oh, wow.
And when George asked, I said, yeah. And I know he was shocked, because he's asked many, many times over these years, and I'm thrilled to do it this time. And basically, I grew up with all these guys. Jimmy Velvet, and met him first time in Los Angeles at the Red Velvet. Bardo, I've known him. Mark James, when he came from Houston, I've got a little story about Mark and George. Something that you won't know. George Klein and Mark James were co-songwriters. I had a little female artist named Marian Cocke, and we cut a record called Angel of the Morning in 1968, which, thank you very, very much. I carried that song in my briefcase for over a year until I could find the right person to cut it. So we came in to Memphis, and Mark had come from Texas. Of course, I'd known George. He's primarily responsible for my habit, which was the music business. He named one of my groups. I mean, we've been friends for now on about 60 plus years now. Well, on this particular trip in with Marian Cocke, George Klein and Mark Jim co-wrote 2 songs that we could Google them and pull them up. The story George is asking me to tell you was George came to Los Angeles every year for 2 weeks on a vacation. And I had the Raiders, so he stayed at, Mark had the penthouse at Mountain View West, so George took one part of that for his 2-week stay. And Elvis gave him a car, a Cadillac station wagon, which was kind of rare in the day. But we went to Chuck's Steakhouse, I remember it well, and George went to a payphone, called the house, and it was, you know, it was hourly, it was kind of late. But Elvis said, yeah, come on up. Nobody was there, but just the guys weren't there that night. And so we went for a ride, Elvis driving, and he said, I want to show you guys a house I'm going to buy. Business, I'm looking at this house called the Taj Mahal. So we drove through the hills and finally got to the Taj Mahal. And needless to say, it's locked. Nobody's living in it. And we're driving in this circular driveway. And Elvis says, wait a minute. Richard Davis had shown up by that time. He said, Richard, go around and get this front door open. Now, today's time with TMZ and the other outlets that you get your news from, Richard disappeared and came back from the inside, opened the front door. And so we got a tour of the Taj Mahal, but not very long after that door opened, the police started showing up just out of the sky, more or less, and there were several dozen cars before it was over with. And when they realized it was Elvis Presley, they all wanted their helmets signed if they were motorcycle guys. They wanted their tickets signed. They wanted their shirts signed. So before it was over with, there was a party in front of the Taj Mahal with the finest LA Police Department could offer, and George and Margaret, myself, and Margaret was there. That was when Ann and Elvis were close friends. As nice as I can be, they were, and they remained friends for all those years, even after the initial closeness. But it was a great evening, and when you got Elvis Presley as a tour guide, I mean, what more can you ask? And one little thing that happened on the way to the Taj Mahal is that the cars, when we leveled up next to us, and when he realized Elvis was driving, Elvis said, well, I got a little problem here. Can you help me with this crowd back here? He said, I got a couple of friends in from LA, and can you help me? The guy gets off of his motorcycle and says, yes, Mr. Presley. Light turns green, he stops all the traffic in all four directions, and we drive off. And so we got a little privacy after that. But if you can only imagine in today's time that happening, just not going to happen. But there we were in the middle of Los Angeles, California, and a policeman stops traffic 4 ways in an intersection so that Elvis Presley could have some privacy, which was very, very rare. I think there's one story that you'd really like. The 68 TV special on NBC. This is one of my favorite stories about Elvis. And the reason is because everybody thought that Elvis was gone. Quite untrue, I might add. The Raider office was 8831 Sunset Boulevard, and Bender Howe, who produced that show, were at 8833, and there was about a 10-foot breezeway between those two buildings. And if you've been up and down Sunset Boulevard, there were two buildings that were matching that had elevators on the front by the sidewalk. My window from my office and Bender's windows were exactly opposite each other, 10 feet apart. Well, they rehearsed for the 68 TV special in their conference room. It was large, but it was not like a rehearsal hall at ABC or any of the normal rehearsal halls that you would expect to see for a show of this magnitude. So they would rehearse. So Alan and Richard and Jimmy Kingsley and others would come over to my office and just either fall asleep on the couch or whatever it was while they were rehearsing, and then when they would leave, they'd just yell from one window to the next, and they'd all go downstairs and meet and get the cars and leave. So one night, Paul Revere, who passed last October, a year ago, Elvis was his absolute, indescribable, I mean, a fan, this was a fan. Paul Revere loved Elvis Presley. So when he heard that they were rehearsing 10 feet from our office, he said, Jeremy, he said, you know him, you think you could see if we could meet him? And I said, well, let me check. So that night when we went downstairs, they were pulling out of the alleyway, and I said, Elvis, I said, Paul Revere would really, really like to meet you. He said, oh man, you're kidding. He said, man, I love those guys. He said, I watch that little old TV show where they run up down a beach and all that crazy stuff. And he said, I'd love to meet Revere. I said, you kidding? I fully expected, well, you know, business, let's do it another time. So I said, well, when do you want to do it? He said, well, tell you what, next 2 or 3 days when we're rehearsing and when it's over with, he said, if they're here, when we leave, we'll all meet downstairs and we'll visit. And he said, yeah, I'd love for. So we invited Keith Allison, who was on Where the Action Is with us, Revere, Joey from the Shin Dogs, Steve Alamo, and when they quit rehearsing, we all met downstairs, and that was in front of the building, actually, on the sidewalk on Sunset Boulevard, about 100 yards from the Whiskey A Go-Go, which is one of the most popular parts of Sunset. And picture this, if you will. Everybody had been telling Elvis, especially the Bender Howe people, and George, you know that story, that he needed to do this special and that he needed to do it to bring him back. So Elvis, after a period of time, and it wasn't a week or two, but a little while, he decided, yeah, let's do this thing. So then he did bare bones. What you saw on the 68 special was what they rehearsed in a conference room and then put on worldwide TV. While we were down there, within minutes, cars started stopping in traffic on Sunset Boulevard, and it became gridlock for about a block and a half, both north and south. People just got out of their cars in 6 lanes of traffic and left them sitting there. And there were hundreds of people that were on the sidewalk and in the street trying to get close enough to Elvis and Revere and the others. And they started signing autographs. And Revere and Elvis had a great visit, I might add. Made arrangements for Revere to see him in Las Vegas and be backstage, not once but twice. So he was just a very kind-hearted guy. He didn't have to be, but he was. So one of Elvis's guys, and I don't think I'll mention his name, that came over to Elvis and said, man, Elvis, there's going to be a ride here. Well, about that time, the Chips guys came driving down the sidewalk on their bikes, and they realized that it was Elvis Presley and Paul Revere and Steve Alamo and all these guys standing there conversing. And for a guy that was supposed to be not popular anymore, this debunked that incredibly. And if you remember, Mr. Bender tells the story that he took Elvis over on Santa Monica Boulevard and they got out and walked around and nobody paid any attention. First off, that never happened. You're talking to a guy who was standing there. It was on at 8831 Sunset Boulevard, which is 1 mile from Santa Monica. I was present, so I can attest to the fact that it gridlocked traffic and people started calling the police, and it just got, they couldn't get the helicopters in, not in that neighborhood, but anyway, they let them stay and talk for as long as they wanted to, and then allowed them to leave at their leisure and cleared the traffic for them to leave. But of course, the problem there is that the people that were at the front of each line, they had to find those people first to get them to start moving their cars. But anyway, that lasted for about an hour, and Sunset Boulevard was gridlocked. I can attest to the fact that the Bender story about Santa Monica Boulevard and Elvis Presley walking around and nobody cared is not true. It is true that he did gridlock traffic.
Jerry Williams. Ladies and gentlemen, one of our guests here has been here almost every year, and when I call his name out, you'll know exactly who he is.